quick adjustment. Hi, Founder fans. Welcome to Founder of the Day Week in Review. Thank you so much for watching. I am crossing my fingers and hoping that my face appears here about 14 seconds behind where I am. Yes, and there it goes. Great. It's working. Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties, as every week. There's always something I do a little bit not quite right, but not quite wrong. So thank you for joining me. People are starting to trickle in here. I appreciate that. Hope everyone is having fun as I roll up my sleeves to get into it. I hope everyone is having a fun Saturday. Probably nice and quiet, as most of the world is staying home. So I appreciate you joining me here. As always with the Week in Reviews, just a reminder, I am going to go through the articles I published the last 7 days for founderoftheday.com. Talk about who I wrote about, what I learned, what was new, what I might have known, blah blah blah, and we'll have some fun here. So let's get into it. I do want to say, as a reminder, the first two articles we discussed are actually old articles because I only write new articles Monday through Friday because that's a lot of work. Thank you for showing up. I see someone hit like. Hi, TJ. Oh, you made it right at the beginning this week. That's great. If anyone watched could hit like, that would really appreciate that. And let's get into it. Now, I do want to apologize. I haven't been able to soundproof these windows for some reason, so I hope the cars driving by aren't too much of an inconvenience. I apparently thought I was buying a house on a quiet country road, but apparently it's a main thoroughfare through the heart of the United States. So let's get into it. Last Saturday, on the 28th of March, I put out an article about a man named John Heath, who... I gotta make my titles a little bit clickbaity because I want people to read them, and that's the world we live in when you're writing a blog. So I titled it John Heath, America's First Frat Boy. And it's not really fair to call him a frat boy. In fact, he's kind of the opposite. So John Heath went to the College of William & Mary in Virginia just after independence was declared. He was a freshman in the fall of 1776. He goes and he notices that there are already several fraternal organizations there, but he doesn't like them because they are behaving like we might expect a fraternity to behave. They are, as he liked to say, socializing too much. They were being merry, if you will, and he thought that the purpose of a fraternal organization should be taken a lot more seriously. So he created the organization of Phi Beta Kappa, which is still around, and it was the first Greek university in the United States. Up until this point, other fraternities either had English titles or Latin titles, and this was the first time he used Greek. And he chose Phi Beta Kappa because it roughly translates to, the love of wisdom is the governor of one's life. So he thought that was appropriate. He wanted to use the fraternity to study and as well as learn more about other topics that weren't being discussed in school. He wanted the students and the brothers of the fraternity to be able to just chit-chat about whatever topics were on their mind and not just what was necessarily being provided as school's curriculum at that time. Excuse me. So, in addition to founding Greek life, he actually had several other important aspects to developing Greek life in modern America as we know it today. And I apologize to anyone who doesn't care for fraternities. I was in a small local fraternity back in college, which is what piqued my interest about this. But so Phi Beta Kappa created a motto and a seal and had a secret handshake, and they even had secret initiations. Now, we don't know what these were because they were secret. We would assume since he was creating this organization in response to the good time having other organizations, there probably wasn't a lot of hazing, but there was some organization. And additionally, Phi Beta Kappa would actually start chartering within the next decade to Yale. It was Dartmouth and Harvard. They all got charters within a decade. So this was the first fraternal organization that went national, which is very famous today, and most fraternities are. Again, mine was not. Mine was just a bunch of guys in one college in upstate New York, but that's fine. And then John Heath would actually go on to be fairly important to Virginia. He was a district attorney in his county, and he would go on to become he'd serve in the House of Representatives. He was in the 3rd United States Congress during the Washington administration when he was still very young. And he would end up spending most of his life in private law practice, but he did contribute to the founding a little bit in addition to, founding fraternities. Again, though, calling him a frat boy is kind of not only deceiving, but partially rude, because he certainly would not have considered himself a frat boy, and as I said, he purposely started Phi Beta Kappa as opposed to the frats that were having too much of a good time. So that's John Heath. That's a little fun right off the top. The next day, I republished an article about Elijah Clark. Now, Elijah Clark had served in the American Revolution. He was from Georgia he was from North Carolina, but moved to Georgia just before the Revolution began. And he was an early and eager patriot. He served in the war, by all accounts, honorably. And then he really starts to become interesting after the war. He tries to sign up for the French army to join the French Revolution, but George Washington kicks out a man named Citizen Genet, who was the foreign ambassador to the United States from France. Washington gets him recalled, and this is one of the early things that Thomas Jefferson really liked Genet, and this is one of the places where things were dividing. But this relates to Elijah Clark because, Clark was essentially told by Washington, not directly, but anyone who wanted to go fight was told, no, we're not supporting this war. So Clark went back, and he serves in the Georgia militia, and eventually there's this area called, there's the... let me pronounce it right. I want to read it to make sure it's right. The Oconee River. And Georgia laid claims to land on the other side of the Oconee River, to the west. And settlers were moving west, especially after the Revolution. People kept moving there. The problem is that there was the Creek nation of Native Americans was living there, and they did not want settlers. So there's actually a very important treaty is negotiated between George Washington and Henry Knox and the leaders of the Creek, called the Treaty of New York, and it was done in what was then the capital, New York City. The Creek traveled all the way there to negotiate this treaty. And part of that treaty said, this land is for Native Americans. And the settlers who were coming from Georgia didn't seem to care, so they kept coming onto the land that was Creek land. So Elijah Clark is one of these people, and he joins them. And the thing is, Clark and some of his comrades come up with the idea that, hey, we won't be breaking federal law by settling on this land if we declare ourselves an independent nation. And that's exactly what they did. With Clark at the helm, they created the Trans-Oconee Republic. And they essentially said, we're an independent nation about the size of a county in Georgia. And they wrote a constitution, they had elections, they built a fort and a small town. And then word got back to George Washington that this was going on. And he said, we're not going to go to war with the Creek that we just worked so hard to finally negotiate peace with, just because these people want to settle on this land. So Washington had Georgia call out its militia. And the Georgia militia went to the Republic, the Trans-Oconee Republic, which was only not a lot of people. I'm not sure I was able to locate the exact number of people that created this republic, but it was probably about 100. And the militia shows up, and the settlers, we'll call them, the Transocheans, I'm not sure what they refer to themselves, the Transocheans went into their fort and hunkered down, and there was a siege, and basically, Elijah Clark sent out word and said, hey, listen, if you promise not to charge any of us with a crime, we will surrender and come out. We've made our point. We will come out and everything will be okay. And that's exactly what happened. The leaders of the militia said, yeah, we won't let them prosecute you for anything. And they came out and everything was let go, because most of these people were patriots of a war that had only ended about 15 years beforehand. So they come out, and when they're leaving, the Georgia militia follows their orders to burn down the village they built. So, in about 5 months, the Trans-Oconee Republic was settled, created, built, and literally destroyed and removed from the earth. in just a brief 5 months. And that's essentially the story of Elijah Clark and his little nation he built out in western Georgia. I'm sorry I keep laughing. I just find the whole idea of it hilarious. There are several little countries that popped up like this about the time, and this one is probably the funniest because they destroy the whole town. All these buildings, it's not even like they use the buildings. They're like, nope, this is Cherokee land. Buildings shouldn't have been here in the first place. I'm going to pop over here. Hi, guys. Thanks for everyone watching. Thanks for the likes. Let's see. No questions yet. We'll keep moving on. We'll see if we can keep it. Last 2 weeks have been just under an hour. Let's see if we can pop it down a little bit, make it a little more palatable to everyone. So last Monday I published an article about Andrew Porter Powder's Yorktown is what I called it. So Andrew Porter was one of those obscure founders that I stumble on during my research, and I write his name down. I'm like, I'm going to come back and see what I can find about this guy later. And then I come back and it's like, not much to know, despite hours of research. So there are two interesting stories I stumbled on. Porter had originally joined the Revolutionary War. He joined the Continental Army and became a captain of the Marines. But soon thereafter, he actually was really impressed by Henry Knox and left the Marines to join the artillery. And he served there for several years, but there was one controversy. There was a man named Isaac Craig. I'm not sure where everyone is, DJ. I'm sure they'll be around. Sometimes people pop in a little bit late. It's okay. So this gentleman, Isaac Craig, had gone to sea, but he was still in the artillery. And while he was at sea, he was named as a captain. And then while he was gone, Andrew Porter was then also named captain of the same unit. Now, he starts leading this unit, and then eventually this Craig gentleman comes back. When he returns, he says, hey, I'm captain. And Porter's like, no, you've been away. And there's this debate that actually I read a letter that Porter sent to George Washington himself, trying to settle this debate. Saying, no, like, I was named captain because he was gone. He doesn't just get to come back and take it because Craig had never actually had the title. Had he had the title and then left to sea and come back, it might be a different story. But he never got word he was at sea. In the end, Craig gets to keep his position. Porter gets to keep the position. Porter is captain, and I didn't follow much up on what happened to Craig because I was reading about Porter. Sorry, I will have to look in and give Craig his own article soon enough. So in the artillery, despite this, Porter keeps raising through the ranks of artillery, and eventually he's at Yorktown, where George Washington specifically puts him in charge of securing the powder for the artillery in the siege of Yorktown. Now, by which he's not in charge of securing all the gunpowder for every weapon at Yorktown, but he's in charge of either creating or commandeering or purchasing all of for the cannons and artillery of that nature. I don't know if cannon powder is a thing. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I was about to say cannon powder. I'm assuming the same powder's used for guns as is for cannons, just more of it, but I'm going to look into that. I'm going to write this down with a question mark. Cannon powder. Powder? I will look into that. I am sorry for starting to talk about something that I know nothing about. But hey, I write these articles and I make these videos because I'm learning, and I am inviting you to learn along with me. So next week, I will assure you I will have an answer as to whether or not cannon powder is a real thing. Let's check to see if there's any questions. I don't know where everyone is, but that's all right. Some people are watching who just can't comment. Not everyone necessarily is signed in, and I appreciate everyone who does watch. Thank you so much. So Andrew Porter, that's pretty much his claim to fame, is he secured the powder for the artillery at Yorktown. But he had some very interesting descendants. Two of his sons would serve as governors, one of Michigan Territory and one of Pennsylvania, where Porter was from. And I should also mention, Porter would go on to become a major general in the Pennsylvania militia after the war. And he served as surveyor general, which basically meant he was in charge of figuring out where the land was. So anyway, two of his sons were governors. One was Secretary of War for President John Tyler, who was in the just after Martin Van Buren, early 1840s. I believe he took over for Harrison when no, I should know this. Tippecanoe and Tyler too, not Taylor. Okay, yeah, so he took over for Harrison. Sure. Okay, great. Glad we figured that out. But speaking of later presidents who I don't do nearly enough research on, he had a great granddaughter whose name was Mary Todd. So Andrew Porter's great granddaughter, Mary Todd, married some dude named Abraham Lincoln. So that is really how he's a founder. He founded a family that governed a bunch of states, acted as Secretary of War, and married the Abraham Lincoln. If there are any questions on Andrew Porter, who as I said, is a super random person, that's fine. But speaking of presidents that I don't do nearly enough research on, I wrote almost 3 articles this week about a man named Andrew Jackson. Now, I posted on my Twitter a poll. Do you think Andrew Jackson is an American founder? And with, I believe, 85 or 88 votes, it was a resounding no. 92%, no. Andrew Jackson does not count as a founding father. Now, why this is interesting is Andrew Jackson was in the American Revolution. And he did serve in the United States House of Representatives while George Washington was president. And I've given people like Andrew Porter a founder of the day for significantly less than either of those things. Now, right up front, it seems to be that the reason people don't believe Andrew Jackson was a founding father is because he was a president, and he wasn't just any president. An era is called the Age of Jackson. He's given his entire epoch of American history bears his name. And it is an era that came after the American Revolution was 100% complete. No matter when we might think individually the American Revolution ended. And, most people will have a different answer for that. For example, I generally look at Lafayette's farewell tour, where he came back during the Monroe administration, went to all the new states, and then left when John Adams was president. Some people believe when John Quincy Adams was elected president because he was literally the son of a founding parent. Some people would say it's July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, when both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams passed away on the same day, which is definitely a serious contender. And then there are people who say it's way earlier than that. But it's hard to say Andrew Jackson was a founder when clearly his presidency marked a point that during the James Monroe administration, the era of good feeling is kind of looked at as its own era. And at the same time, there's the second generation of American politicians starts showing up. So, not to ramble on about it, but the overwhelming consensus, and I feel like I agree with this, is that Andrew Jackson was not a founding father. That being said, I wrote 3... Oh, you toured the Hermitage site, TJ. That's awesome. I might have. I have to ask my dad. I think I went to Tennessee. I think I went to Nashville when I was young. Sorry for the radio silence. That's confusing. I'm going to write that down too. I think I did go to the Hermitage. I was so young, I can't remember if I'm confusing it with Mount Vernon. Because, not that I traveled that far and wide as a kid, but I was a nerdy kid who wanted to see historic sites, even before I can remember what it was I was seeing. So anyway, even though Andrew Jackson was not a founder, it still speaks to him, his place in the Revolution. It's fun to learn about that, to know about his later life. So, The first article I wrote was about Andrew Jackson, the Revolutionary War. And Jackson was 13 years old. His father passed away. I didn't know this. Apparently, Andrew Jackson's father died, who moved from Ireland to the border of South and North Carolina. He died 3 weeks before Jackson was born in an accident felling trees. So he was raised by his mother and had 2 older brothers. And what's interesting, and I didn't write about this, but apparently there's a huge debate about exactly what state Andrew Jackson was born in, because he was right on the border of North and South Carolina. And apparently both states in that area still argue about who is the rightful owner of Andrew Jackson's birthplace. But and I didn't include that, but even though I had read about it, I was like, no. And then I had a bunch of people comment, like, why didn't you talk about this? So, anyway, his mother ends up saying, hey, to Andrew and his older brother, Robert, his oldest brother, whose name escapes me, let's see, did I put it in? Andrew Jackson's oldest brother, Hugh, fought in the American Revolution and was killed at the Battle of Stono Ferry. Following year, he is apprenticed. Him and his brother Robert essentially become apprentices, or doing courier work, which means delivering letters for William Richardson Davey. And William Richardson Davey was a future delegate to the Constitutional Convention. He wouldn't sign the Constitution. He would leave a little early, but he did support it. So he was working directly for a really important future founder. And in this work, they do participate in the Battle of Hanging Rock. And unfortunately, it looks like they're on leave at their uncle's house when Andrew and his brother Robert are taken prisoner by the British. Now, there's a famous story that while they're being held prisoner, they are told to shine the shoes of a British officer. And Andrew Jackson, as a 13 or so year old boy, apparently was always very stubborn and said, no, like, I'm not going to shine your shoes. So the officer slashed him with his sword, and he must have put his hand up because he had a scar on his hand and his face for the rest of his life. And he would always hate the British for this. But it gets way worse. So the same thing happened to Andrew's brother, and then they are kept in terrible conditions and malfed, and they both catch smallpox, and then their mother comes and picks them up, eventually haggles for them to get out because they're boys, and they have one horse, and Andrew and his mother walk because his older brother Robert is way sicker. And they walk all the way back 40 miles to their home with smallpox, and the last 2 or 5 miles or so, the story, of course, always changes. It's hard to, none of this is really very well documented, but a few miles from home, it starts downpouring. And they get there, and both of them almost die. Somehow, Andrew survives, but his older brother passes away because of the smallpox, and he develops pneumonia. So Andrew, now 14 years old, just survived smallpox, scarred in the face, really hates the British. His mother, to make some money, starts volunteering with the as a nurse for wounded soldiers. And there's a cholera outbreak, apparently, and she goes to help cure the outbreak, and she also catches cholera and passes away. So, at just 14 years old, Andrew Jackson is essentially alone in the world. Apparently recovered from his wounds very well, but he did have some relatives around. It doesn't seem like they got along. So now we're moving into the next day's article, which was basically the second half of the first half of Andrew Jackson's life. Jackson goes around and he somehow earns a little bit of money and gets a sporadic education and is able at 16 to start apprenticing to a lawyer. And the lawyer helps train him and teach him the ways of the law. And by the time he turns 20 years old, so 6 years after this whole ordeal, the revolution is still happening. We haven't quite written the Constitution yet. Andrew Jackson passes the bar in North Carolina and becomes a lawyer. And this rough and tumble, all alone boy somehow makes connections. We often look at him as rough and tumble and very gruff and manly. I mean, it's no secret he would go on to get shot in duels on several occasions. But what we don't often talk about, and what really struck me while writing this article, was that Andrew Jackson must have been fairly charming and extraordinarily intelligent. Because he was able, with a meager education, to convince someone to allow him to study the law under his auspices, and then pass the bar at just 20 years old, which is no easy task. I mean, most of the founders we know would graduate college young, but then still go study for several years under a lawyer. So he passes the bar very young, and he secures, after he gets his law degree, secures the right to be district attorney for the Western District. I meant to put in quotes. Now, the Western District of North Carolina would not long be Tennessee. So he's one of the first people to be a district attorney in Tennessee. And he travels out there and he becomes friendly with a man named William Blount, who at this point had just signed the United States Constitution and has also moved out to Tennessee. And Blount is one of those people who is very good at helping Andrew Jackson become an important member of the community. And I have talked about, not too long ago, I made a video about William Ezekiel Polk, who would also help Jackson become an important member of Tennessee politics. And Ezekiel Polk was the grandfather of James K. Polk, who would also be a president of the United States and longtime ally of Andrew Jackson in the future, and would run as a, hey, I'm just like Andrew Jackson when he ran for president. But not to get too off topic, not long after he gets to Tennessee, Andrew Jackson is chosen as Attorney General for, again, the Western District. And he plays a major role in the formation of Tennessee as the 15th state. And in 1796, when Tennessee becomes the 15th state, he becomes the first congressman in the history of Tennessee. And while he's the first congressman in the history of Tennessee, he goes to Philadelphia, where George Washington is still president of the United States. So he is, I will repeat, the first congressman from Tennessee during the administration of George Washington. Another reason why he kind of could make a claim as a founder of the United States. I also would like to point out that then as now, under the early United States Constitution and our modern Constitution, the United States Senate was given 2 senators from each state, and the House of Representatives was given congressman based on population. So, when Tennessee sent its first delegates, it had 2 senators and 1 Andrew Jackson in the House of Representatives. I just thought, I don't know what struck me, which nowadays, I don't think it happens. I mean, Wyoming's only got like 600,000 people, so it probably doesn't have a lot of representatives, but it's got to be more than 1, right? I should look into that. Let me know, leave a comment if you know how many congressmen they have in Wyoming. Anyway, Jackson does get there because he goes after Tennessee becomes a state and Congress is already in session. He's only there for a few months when George Washington his term ends and John Adams steps in as the new president. Jackson he is one of the few people who voted against a resolution to officially thank George Washington for his service. It's a strange one. At the time, we're not long after Jay's Treaty had been passed, and also several Democratic Republicans saw that Washington had fired some people he disagreed with, who they saw as Democratic Republicans, and they were replaced with Federalists, which many people didn't like. Not a lot of people voted against the resolution of thanks for George Washington, And this would actually come back to haunt him later in his career when he was running for president of the United States. Um, so that essentially is it. He would go on to be Andrew Jackson. He would fight in the War of 1812 and be a hero in New Orleans. He would become the first governor of Florida after fighting the Seminole Wars with the Native Americans down there. He would give John Quincy Adams a lot of trouble when they ran against each other for president in a corrupt bargain, and he would go on to be, the Andrew Jackson. I do believe a question or two popped up while I was talking. You didn't care for watching. Yeah, okay, I went through that. Oh, okay, I can elaborate a little bit more for you, Ted. Ned, sorry. I see the questions pop up here in my phone camera while I'm talking, but I can't necessarily read them while I'm speaking so quickly. But to elaborate a little more, as I said, his real issue with Washington was twofold. It was, I kind of did go over it, but it was really the Jay Treaty, which no one seemed to like, and the firing of federal judges that he didn't care for. There was also seems to have been a tint of we hired you to be president and all you did was do your job. Why do you get special thanks for just going to work and doing your job? There's a lot of... I never read that outright, but the tone was there, if that makes any sense, in some of these letters. It's definitely palpable. Because again, Andrew Jackson, he was smart and apparently fairly charming, but if he got a distaste for you, he was not afraid to show it. He definitely didn't hide his feelings. So moving on, the article I wrote on Thursday, I was really on an Andrew Jackson kick. I'm sorry it's a little not foundery today, but we've been sticking. Nothing I've said so far about Andrew Jackson took place after the year 1800. So, no Thomas Jefferson presidency. So, dueling a president. I wrote about Waightsell Avery. Waightsell Avery. Waightsell. Waightsell Avery. I came across Waightsell Avery because he's the first person that got in a duel with Andrew Jackson. And that's pretty much what this is about. Although I did, if you pardon me 1 second. I'm back. I keep running into the issue that the cat kicks open the door, which isn't a problem, except when the whole family's taking a nap and they all wake up and might not remember that you're live on the internet right now while we're talking. So I just shut the door real quick. Waightsell Avery graduated from Princeton, and he started a law practice in North Carolina. He became an active patriot. He was significantly older than Andrew Jackson. I should say that outright. Well, Avery had learned the law, blah, blah, blah. Now I've lost my train of thought. All right, and I'm back. He was in the American Revolution, and he was actually an attorney general for North Carolina while it was still a colony. But he disagreed with all the laws the government was passing, and he joined the rebels in their rebellion and revolted against the government. Once the war ends, or during the war, but once independence is declared, Avery helps write the new constitution for North Carolina, and then he is chosen as the first Attorney General of North Carolina. And he additionally serves in the Colonial Assembly for about a decade. Eventually, he decides to make his way west to, as what I said before, was called the Western District, but what would soon be Tennessee. And Waightsell would also play a smaller role in creating Tennessee. Since he was riding the circuit as a lawyer, and he went out to Jonesboro, North Carolina, and he was doing some trials there and helping some clients. While he was there, he met a young man named Andrew Jackson. So Waightsell is about 47 years old at this point, and Andrew Jackson comes in, he's 20, and they both stop there to do some lawyerings at the local townhouse. And this is while Jackson is moving west. He hasn't made it west of Tennessee yet. They kind of meet there. Now, apparently Waitsell Avery, excuse me, had a tendency to reference Bacon. He had a book in his satchel from his horse that he would bring into the office, and he would always say, talking about lawyer words, talking about the lawyering, I refer to Bacon, and he'd pull out his book. Now, I've seen two different references that it might be a book by Francis Bacon, and it might be a book by Matthew Bacon, both of which wrote fairly common law books at the time. And during my research, during my research, I saw several people saying different books from each other, and I could not confirm which book it was. But here's the point. Apparently, Andrew Jackson got sick of this old guy in court, keeps saying, I reference bacon, so he took a nice thick cut of bacon, real pig pork bacon, and put it into his satchel and replaced the book. So while he's in court, Waitsell Avery goes, I refer to Bacon, and reaches into his bag and pulls out a big sloppy piece of pork. And let's just say he's not very happy about this. And he turns and quickly realizes it's Jackson. Again, this story hasn't really been well documented. But he somehow realizes immediately it's Jackson and, lectures him about, we're in a courthouse. We need to take this seriously. You're in court. This is the law. I know you're a young man, just graduated with your law degree, and you're making your way out to become a district attorney, but you got to take this seriously. Turns out Jackson didn't love being reprimanded in the middle of court in front of an audience, so he did what people did back then. He demanded a duel, and he actually demanded it twice, because he sent a letter and didn't get a response the next day, so he sent another letter and said, hey, give me my satisfaction. So, he did. And the Waitsell Avery says, okay, I'll meet you on the dueling ground. Now, they go out to duel. Again, the details are extremely fuzzy. You would think as the duel of a president of the United States, we'd know more about it. We know more about some of his later duels, but this one, the details are extremely fuzzy. He wasn't a famous person yet. They were out on the frontier. They were... Well, anyway, what it seems to be is that they went out and Jackson either fired and missed or fired away to say, hey, I've proven my point, which was common during duels back then. I'm satisfied. You came out like a man to meet me here. We'll tell everyone I shot at you and missed. And then Waitsell either did the same thing or didn't fire at all. But it appears he decided that, from some of the accounts I read, what seems to have happened is Jackson fires away, and then Waitsell doesn't fire. Instead, he starts lecturing Jackson about respecting his elders and how, what you did here was wrong. But also, apparently he said it in a way, that got to Jackson's attention, and they left the field as friends. And would remain friends, acquaintances, for the remainder of Waitsell's life. Because, again, he was significantly older than Jackson. I will repeat, Waitsell was 47 years old, having a duel with a 20-year-old. So, that's the story of Waitsell Jackson. The first Attorney General of North Carolina. And the first guy who got in a duel with Alexander Hamilton over some bacon in a courthouse. So, I'll see if anyone has any questions. No, not too much. That's okay. I really appreciate you guys being here and watching and participating. It does sound like a not fun duel, Ned. Wow, I keep doing that today. Sorry, Ned. I apologize. Yeah. I can't tell if it sounds like a terrible duel or absolutely hilarious. To have, a kid fire a gun at this, man, and then the man is just shame on you. Let me tell you about the birds and the bees, son. Okay, so to finish up today, we'll talk about, as we always do, the Federalist paper. I wrote number 75. Yeah, published yesterday, Fridays. Number 75 is about treaties and the So according to the Constitution, the president, with the advice and consent of the Senate, gets to negotiate treaties with foreign countries. And then the Senate, with a 2/3 majority, can ratify the treaties. Now, as I'm sure we've come to know, the Anti-Federalists had problems with this, because they have problems with pretty much everything in the Constitution. And what's really, really, really interesting is that the Anti-Federalists couldn't agree on what they disagreed with. In fact, there were some Anti-Federalists said, well, we don't want the president to make treaties because he'll abuse it for himself, just like the King of England used to do, or all monarchs would do. Some people said, we don't want the Senate involved because then it'll slow down the treaty-making process, and sometimes these things have to happen quickly. Some people said, hey, why isn't the House of Representatives involved? Some people said, why doesn't the Senate make treaties and the president ratifies it or vetoes it? Why doesn't the House of Representatives make treaties and the Senate blah, 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 blah. Literally every combination thereof you can think of, people were saying, why is this not what happens? And Alexander Hamilton, in Federalist number 75, essentially says, look, none of you know how we should handle this. Everyone disagrees. So, therefore, we need to come up with some kind of compromise, or we'll never get any treaties made ever. And therefore, we've come up with this compromise. You should deal with it. He does elaborate more than that. His reasoning behind this particular compromise is that we do need to get things done pretty quickly, and when you're dealing with foreign nations and foreign entities, they want to know that they have one powerful person in charge that they can deal with, that they are negotiating with this one person. However, they also want to know that if and when they make a treaty with the United States, they're not making it with this president just for this next president to come in 4 years and throw it out the window. And that's why Senate's ratification of the treaty verifies for other nations, hey, we are serious about this treaty. It's not just going to flip-flop over with another president, because that president would have to get, if one president needs 2/3 of a majority to sign a treaty, well, the next president is going to need a lot of those people to change their mind about something they really just ratified, which probably won't happen. A great example of this is the Jay Treaty that we discussed earlier. How it was wildly unpopular, but was not immediately removed with John Adams. Additionally, Hamilton likes to point out that because the Senate has to ratify the treaty, it means that the president can't just go and do things for his own gain. The president is, in essence, being checked and balanced, as the Constitution is so eager to do. Now, furthermore, because the Senate is involved, not only is the president, when making the treaty, have to keep that in mind, but it makes it so that they, in a fashion, have a say. First of all, it does say with the advice and consent of the Senate in the Constitution, so they should have a say ahead of time to help them ratify it later. But when it is ratified, the Senate is participating. So the president negotiating the treaty makes it a speedy process. The fact that the Senate is already involved in the conversation before it's completed also speeds up the process. But the Senate can put a stop to it if need be. Excuse me. I use the terminology in the article this week. It checks and balances the president and the Senate, because the president can keep it a speedy process by not having too many cooks in the kitchen. But those cooks are definitely looking in from the dining room to run in if they have to. So let's see. That's all the articles this week. What time are we at? 45 minutes. Oh, wow. It's way shorter than normal. So unless you guys have any questions or recommendations or anything you'd like to see in the future, that's really it for this week. I'm going to drink my water. I made it this far. Sorry, I make sure to bring water because it's a lot of talking. Ned with Still thinking about the duel and imagining Avery waving his finger at Jackson while giving him a good talking to. Yeah, I mean, I'm animated, and I don't know if, like, that's exact. Again, it's not very well documented, so we can't say this is exactly how it went down, but, I like to think it is. Cool. So I will let you guys go. I thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you watching and tuning in for several weeks. TJ and Ned, and then person number 3. There's always person number 3 who never comments. I'm curious to who you are, person number 3. But thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, I will bring you a new video next week. If you guys are interested, check out my shop. I have a few t-shirts and coffee mugs with fun Founders quotes that I love on there. They also link to old videos I made that talk about the quotes and why I love them. So check that out at the very least to drive some traffic over there. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. And I will see you, I'll have a video out for you Monday, and I will be back with some live action just like this next week. So, Founder of the Day out. Still working on my closing slogan. See ya! Did it end? Did I end it?